Does Canada have a distorted sense of its relationship with the government in Beijing? According to distinguished foreign correspondent and author Jonathan Manthorpe, we mistakenly think the government of the People's Republic of China actually cares about what we think. Wrong, says Manthorpe. They care about what is said about them by foreign governments because they want to portray a utopian image of the economic miracle that continues to unfold in their country. Any criticism is quickly challenged internationally and silenced within their borders. What is equally concerning to the government in Beijing, according to Manthorpe, is criticism from expats. In his book, Claws of the Panda, Manthorpe points out the ruling party keeps tabs on vocal opponents and lets them know they are watching, and that they are more than willing to include extended family members in their campaign to silence the voices they do not want to hear. When our Prime Minister says he is going to talk to the government in Beijing about human rights and the rule of law, Manthorpe says all that does is irritate the Chinese government, and it throws a chill on government-to-government relations. Then add in the arrest of Meng Wanzhou of Huawei, and the relationship turns icy cold with far-reaching consequences that affect any Canadian who travels to or does business with China. We invited Jonathan Manthorpe to join us for a conversation that matters about our distorted view of our relationship with China and how we might get it back on track to accurately reflect its true nature. That being, we are a pawn in China's North American strategy, and we own natural resources that their overheated economy needs.
Conversations That Matter is a partner program of the Center for Dialogue at Simon Fraser University. The production of this program is made possible thanks to the following and viewers like you. Please become a patron at conversationsthatmatter.tv.
Mr. Manthorpe, welcome.
Thank you.
Your book is timely and prescient in many ways, and but it also gives a historical overview of our relationship between Canada and China. And I like the quote off the top where Henry Kissinger says, China doesn't see itself as an emerging power. It just sees itself as a power that's reasserting itself.
Yeah.
And have we gotten our relationship with China mixed up a little bit where we thought that we were the more important power?
We've suffered from self-delusion in the relationship with China almost from the beginning. I mean, I put that historic context in purposefully because I think it's essential to the story. I mean, we have to know how we got here from there. And successive generations of Canadians going back to the missionaries in the 1880s through to the 1940s have thought that somehow they were going to change China. And that they were going to, more recently, of course, that they were going to change the Communist Party, that they were going to persuade the Communist Party to adopt the rule of law or adopt democracy, become stakeholders in regional security and everything else, and it hasn't happened. None of it's happened.
And the pretense was that it would happen as a result of prosperity.
And we weren't alone in that. You know, the Americans were involved in that, the Australians as well. But you know, when China was ushered into the WTO, the World Trade Organization, in the turn of this century, I mean, the expectation was that as it became a middle-class country, that the middle class would demand political representation. Well, it hasn't happened. The Communist Party has gone in entirely the opposite direction. It has become an authoritarian state of the most of a uniquely technical kind. We haven't seen anything like this before in human history or in the history of authoritarian states. It's quite astonishing.
You point out with that metaphor about the glass that can easily shatter with just the right touch. Despite the fact that the Communist Party of China appears to be omnipresent and omnipowerful within China and within its spheres of influence, they seem so worried about the global perception of how Beijing functions.
And they're worried about their own longevity in power as well. I mean, I think one has to remember that essentially what we've got now is a classic Chinese dynasty, historic dynasty. It's the Mao dynasty, if you like.
Under a different name.
Under a different name. But it works in exactly the same ways as the old imperial dynasties. And yeah, I think one has to remember that there has never, ever, ever been, in the 5,000-year history of this country, there has never been a peaceful change of dynasty. They've always been accompanied by violence.
Right.
And so, really ever since Tiananmen Square, the Communist Party has been paranoid that some sort of national movement would spring up that would depose them. And so they have jumped on anything that appears above the balustrade, whether it's lawyers, many of them trained in a Canadian aid program, or Falun Gong or other religions, Catholics, Protestants, whatever. They're particularly concerned about religion. I think the Qing dynasty was almost overthrown in the middle of the 19th century by the Taipan sort of Christian movement. And so the communists are particularly concerned about religion. I think in large part because they have seen so many Chinese people adopt religious practices after the Communist Party really abandoned its, if you like, spiritual context, and became really a party of economic advancement.
Got to get you to hang on for a second while we take a quick commercial break. Conversations That Matter is brought to you by Audlin Brown, a client-focused investment firm that starts client relationships with straightforward conversations focused on you, your aspirations, and your investment priorities. Audlin Brown has been a supporter of Conversations That Matter from the day we started this show. Their only condition was that we provide a non-biased conversation with people from all sides of all sorts of issues. And of course, we couldn't produce this show without the support of Oh Boy Productions. If you're looking to produce a show like this one, I suggest you reach out to Oh Boy. They can help you produce it, and they can help you build your audience. And we also need your support. I ask you to please pledge $1 per show by going to conversationsthatmatter.tv/donate, because those dollars add up and play an important role in helping us produce this show. Now, back to the show. What I find interesting in reading your book, and you talk about the United Front as being this branch of the Chinese Communist government that controls that messaging on so many different levels. How prevalent has it become, or omnipresent in Canadian society without us really paying attention?
Particularly since Xi Jinping came to power in 2012. He calls it China's magic weapon, or Communist Party's magic weapon. Xi Jinping has put a huge amount of resources into the United Front, which is best described as a political warfare organization. The responsibilities of the United Front have been expanded tremendously. Every government department now, at home or abroad, has United Front offices within it. And it is, as you say, it's a charm offensive operation, but it is a political offensive one. I mean, an interesting incident at the beginning of these demonstrations in Hong Kong. There were suddenly a couple of full-page ads in two Canadian Chinese language newspapers, Ming Pao and Sing Tao, where with about 200 names of 200 organizations supporting the Hong Kong administration position on the demonstrations, and by implication, more than anything, decrying the demonstrations. Now, pretty well all those organizations amongst those lists of 200 either don't really exist, or they are United Front organizations which are operating in Canada. And
with rather interesting names: the Benevolent Society, the Friendship Society, the Confucian Institute, and on and on.
And you can, not exclusively, because there are some very notable exceptions, but almost exclusively, if it's got friendship or alliance or cooperation in the name, it's a United Front operation. But that sort of gives you those ads gave an indication of just how organized and how pervasive United Front operations are here. The Chinese language media in Canada now is almost entirely controlled by the Communist Party, as it is in Australia and in the United States.
So they're sending out a jaundiced or a particular perspective on world events, and especially how they relate to China.
Absolutely. Most of our quotes Chinese immigration recently has come from the mainland.
Yes.
These new immigrants, I mean, again, they want to be here, they don't want to be there. And many of them are really alarmed to come here and find that their lives are still controlled to a significant degree by the Communist Party.
Well, as you point out in the book, they're being watched.
Absolutely.
And at times threatened.
Yep.
I was shocked when I read that there are people who are saying, I have received phone calls in the middle of the night, and therere's my aunt or there's my sister on the
mother
phone.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
Saying, please stop your activities.
From, like they've been brought in from a village that's outside of a main center in the middle of the night to make this phone call to say, please stop, because you're putting us in peril.
That's right. And, this is a classic tactic of the Chinese Communist Party, this kind of intimidation. Now, I was very careful about all those incidents that I put in the book, and they're right at the front. They're in chapter 1. I only put the ones in that I could verify from 2 or 3 sources. There were many more. This is far more pervasive than we believe. There have been a lot of warnings to governments of both major parties here about this activity for a long time. The first report that the Canadian Security Intelligence Service did on this, first public report, was back just about 1997-98. It was a report about how the Communist Party had used the United Front in the run-up to the handover of Hong Kong, and then the latter half of the report, or third of the report, was a warning about the rise of the United Front here. Then the Sidewinder report did the same thing, and there have been reports or statements from CSIS over many years to Canadian government saying, look, you've really got to worry about this. Now, it's only really very recently that Canadian governments have started to take it seriously.
That begs a question. We started off by talking about believing that we had this paternalistic or distorted vision of what our power was in this relationship. Is this been part of the problem with political leaders not looking at the reports that are coming from our own intelligence services? It's like, we got this under control because, it's China.
Well, and we have a special relationship. And now, look, this is an interesting question because I don't think that in our sort of democracy we want our political leaders taking the word of our intelligence agencies, and just
at face value. We want them questioning it.
We want them questioning it, and so that's entirely proper. But when you've got CSIS giving these reports for consistently for 20 years or so, then you think that the political leaders ought to be taking more notice than they have. And I think that your question is absolutely right, that a lot of the sloughing aside of these whole issues was because the charm offensive of the Chinese Communist Party with our political leaders, with our business community, has been very, very successful.
It's interesting when you look in the rearview mirror, especially as you have done with this book, and you see the normalization of relations with China under Pierre Trudeau, and how he believed that he was the master of that, but really it was Mao Zedong who said, we have an ally in America's backyard. They were really the architects of that. They picked us. We didn't pick them.
That's right.
And then we fast forward to the the entrepreneur immigrant program and how that gave venue for so many different people to come into the country under that program. But it leads us, and I guess I'm trying to fast forward because I want to come to today, the very interesting situation that we look at with Huawei. And as you point out, here's Huawei, who had been given tax breaks, grants. They developed patents and so on, working with students and universities in Ontario in particular. But that patent then goes back to China. We're paying for it.
Well, and they also, of course, when Nortel went bankrupt, Huawei picked up a lot of their patents dirt cheap. I mean, a lot of Huawei's success has been built on the collapse of Nortel.
And so how interesting that the apprehension, Huawei executive in Vancouver, has put us in this very interesting position where China is angry at us now, and they are lashing back out at us. How does this help us, oddly enough, reset the relationship with China? Because we can't turn our back on China. They're not going to turn their back on us. They need us. We need them. But we need to understand what our place is in this relationship. And so how does this moment give us an opportunity to get on the right path?
I think it's a splendid moment. I disagree with all the people who are running around like chickens with their heads cut off, bewailing the collapse of the Canada-China relationship. I think that this was a crisis waiting to happen, and I think it's a good thing that it has happened. Because for my money, it forces our political leaders, our business leaders, our academic leaders to recognize that we share almost no common values with the Chinese Communist Party.
And so let's understand that and call it for what it is up front.
That's right. And we have to, as you say, we have to have a relationship with China. China is going to be too big and too powerful unless the glass shatters, which may or may not happen. But we have to work on the premise that it's not, that it's going to be a superpower again. So we have to live with it. We have to work with it. But we have to be realistic in our expectations of what we can do and what we can expect from the relationship. An interesting, I think, comparison, and there is some mention of Huawei in the book, but the full denouement didn't happen until after I'd finished writing.
Right.
But just imagine, for example, if it hadn't been Meng Wanzhou, senior financial officer for Huawei, who was wanted on an extradition treaty, imagine it had been a senior executive, from Honda, from Japan, or say from Samsung, from South Korea.
Yes.
We wouldn't have had this sort of crisis because we have broad relationships, common values with South Korea and Japan, which we do not have with China.
Right.
What this has shown is that the only relationship we have with the People's Republic of China and the Communist Party is a basic trading relationship.
We sell, you buy. You sell, we buy.
That's it. We can't have an extradition treaty with them. We can't have a free trade agreement with a country that doesn't believe in the rule of law. We need to keep it simple. And that can work perfectly well. But we don't need to get into bed with these guys. We need to, and we should, be putting much more shoulder behind our relationship with Asia. But we should be looking at the countries with whom we do share broad, not only civic values, but also security values, views on international organizations, how the world should work. And there are many countries in Asia that we share those values with. I mentioned Japan and South Korea, but there's Taiwan, there's Malaysia, there's Australia, New Zealand, there's Indonesia. There are actually many of the countries that are now in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the new Trans-Pacific Partnership without the US and without China, which is a good thing. This is where we should be putting our efforts, behind some other middle powers that share our values in Asia. And if China wants to buy stuff, fine. When the check cashes, we'll send the shipment.
I've been thinking about it since completing your book. I go, well, yes, why not? Why can't we just look at them and say, you're a customer? It's not our responsibility to try and dictate how you're going to run your country. And they openly say that. Do not put any conditions into any trade agreement with us, otherwise it's not going to happen. And as you pointed out, the current Prime Minister Trudeau goes to China and they won't meet with them because he's trying to say, we want to impose our values. And it's a further demonstration recognition of the fact that we are worlds apart culturally.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't mean we can't do business together.
No, we can do business. But we need. I mean, okay, we want to stay out of their front yard, but we want them out of our front yard too. I mean,
but we have to be paying much more vigilant attention to make sure that they're not interfering the way that you've pointed out that they are.
As I point out in the book, one of the problems in the relationship is that we've imported a lot of corruption in this relationship, and I think that actually we can tackle. I mean, a lot of people in the last few weeks, since the whole Huawei thing blew up, have said, we have to try and make peace with China. We have no leverage in this game. They're a massive country. We're only 36 million people. We can't go head to head with them. There are things we can do. And one of the things I suggest that we ought to be doing is cleaning up our own corruption here. We've had these reports from the government here in BC in the last few months about the extent of money laundering here. I mean, we ought to be ashamed. We've become a global center for money laundering. If you believe the Mounties, it's about $12 to $20 billion a year of money is laundered through Canada. If you believe the World Bank, it's $50 billion.
Yeah.
We have got a lot to be ashamed about, and we need to clean it up. And we need to do that for our own good, but in doing it, we would also clean out a lot of the red aristocrats who have been using Canada as a money laundering center. And so we can get them as collateral damage.
Okay, I'm going to have to give a little shout out to Carol James and the NDP, because they have now started to say, sorry, you can't hide behind ownership on that property as a numbered company.
Yep.
It now has to be identified. And that is, there's no doubt it's going to...
We need that nationally. We need to have clear records. There are questions about whether they're publicly available because of our stupid freedom of information privacy legislation, which makes a lot of this stuff difficult. But we need to have clear records of the beneficial ownership of property, of companies, and of trusts.
Yes.
Now, maybe the beneficial ownership would be available only to federal government or other government institutions, but there need to be very strong penalties attached to them, and they need to be applied. I mean, this is really serious business. We in Canada, we risk becoming a sort of Tortuga, a sort of pirate haven. In fact, I think we already are. But I think if we can really seriously start to clean up our own problems with corruption, we would, as I say, we could deal with the red aristocracy menace as collateral damage and not target them directly, but get them on the pass.
Well, this is an extraordinary book that you've written. I wish that I had way more time, because it covers so many different areas. I really appreciate you taking the time to come in and share that with us.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much.